Hi, I'm Trish.
And I'm Brandy.
And you're listening to episode 25 of
Connected Conversations. This is your go-to space where international teachers, leaders, and parents like us get together for real talk, real tips, and sharing tools to thrive abroad in the international schools world.
Between us, Brandy and I have been doing this international teaching gig for nearly 40 years across 4 continents and in more than a dozen countries, working in multiple multilingual English language learning rich environment and school places.
Absolutely. And today we're continuing our ELL mini-series by zooming in on the responsibility, the shared responsibility of working with English as an additional language learners. Something schools say they do constantly, but don't always define or fully clarify. Sometimes that support technically exists, but doesn't always function.
So if you've ever heard your school say, we have ELL support or EAL support, sure, but still you felt completely alone supporting all those multilingual learners in your classroom, then this episode is for you.
Because the conversation isn't about whether schools care. It's about whether the model they're using actually matches the reality of the international classrooms.
Today's episode is part 2 of our ELL mini-series. This is an international files series where we unpack the systems and logistics of international life, moving, and working abroad.
Today, we're talking about ELL support models, why many of them break down in international schools, and what teachers are really experiencing on the ground.
We'll explore what schools say they offer and what often happens in practice, and why borrowing your home country models without adapting it out here can really create some invisible gaps.
Are you ready? It's time to get connected. Let's start with a sentence almost every international teacher has heard. Yeah, we have ELL support. On the surface, it sounds reassuring.
Of course it does. It sounds like there's a system in place, It sounds like you won't be carrying that burden of language learning alone.
Yeah, but when teachers talk about their day-to-day reality, that sentence often means very different things depending on who is saying it. So for leadership, we have ELL support might mean that there's an ELL coordinator on staff, or maybe a timetable slot allocated somewhere in the week. Maybe a policy has been written for accreditation purposes.
Oh, those policies, For admissions, it might mean that there is an English screening process early in the entry process. For parents, it can sound like a promise, a reassurance that their child will be fine, even if English isn't strong yet.
But for classroom teachers, that same sentence could land as uncertainty if certain pieces aren't experienced within the system that they work in.
Yeah, teachers tell us things like, I don't actually know what support looks like once a student is in my classroom, or I don't know who qualifies for ELL support and when it starts and when it ends.
Or I don't know how my expectations are supposed to change for my ELL learner. This is the first major breakdown. Support exists linguistically, but not operationally. The phrase ELL support is used, but it's not defined.
Yeah, and when systems aren't defined, we've said this before, responsibility and the next steps often become blurred. Teachers are left interpreting, what is the support the school is willing to offer? Which students qualify for that support? When do they enter and exit this support system? And what do the parents expect?
When teachers are left trying to piece all these parts together, consistency is in jeopardy. This is where we see a huge gap in what we might call perceived support and functional support. Perceived support reassures stakeholders. It sounds inclusive. It signals care.
Yeah, but that functional support can actually change something. It changes your planning. It changes your assessment in class. It changes the expectations and the access students have.
Teachers often describe situations where ELL support technically exists, but nothing about their workload or decision-making actually shifts. The lesson still has the same language demand. The assessment still expects the same academic phrasing. The pace still moves forward regardless of who is keeping up linguistically.
And so if teachers ask themselves quietly, if support exists, why does it still feel impossible for me to manage? This is where that emotional weight enters, because when systems are vague, the burden doesn't disappear.
Right. It transfers. It lands on who? The classroom teacher.
Yay. And teachers begin second guessing themselves. Am I expecting too much? Am I lowering my standards? Should I lower them? Am I being unfair to this poor kid?
Yeah. Or maybe I'm being unfair to the rest of the class. Should I scaffold more, or am I creating dependence? Should I grade language, or should I be grading the content?
And no one has told these teachers the answer clearly.
Yeah, this kind of role ambiguity is one of the strongest predictors of stress for teachers and burnout.
And not because teachers don't want to support the multilingual learners in class.
Right.
Never that. But it's because they're being asked to solve a system level problem that, that should be done like through a system when it's now their individual judgment doing the work.
Exactly. Every decision all of a sudden feels high stakes. Educators want support for each and every one of their students in the best way that they can possibly give.
Yeah. So every choice starts to feel personal. And when systems and outcomes aren't great, then the teachers often internalize that as failure.
Awful.
I hate that.
Some teachers compensate by over scaffolding. They simplify the tasks so much that access improves, but then the challenge disappears. For example, translating all the content into a student's native language.
Yeah, I know. Or getting the kid next to them to do that. I've seen that.
Yeah.
So, and others go the opposite direction. They remove those supports out of fear of lowering the standards.
Both responses, I think, are understandable.
Yeah, I get it. And both come from the same root issue, a lack of shared definition.
And this is why teachers don't just say, we need more ELL support. What they're really saying is, we need clarity.
Yeah. Schools need to have the clarity about the roles. Is there an additional person or persons who will support this ELL learner?
They need clarity about the expectations too. What do I scaffold? What do I differentiate? How do I adapt my assessments? And if I'm adapting, by what degree?
Yeah. And lastly, educators are looking for clarity about what support is supposed to change. What is the scope of this ELL language learner's journey?
Right.
How long do they receive this support? What does success look like?
Because when a school says, yeah, we support ELL students, but they don't define how that support functions in real classrooms, the system relies on teacher goodwill. And goodwill is not a sustainable model.
Not only that, but in high mobility, multilingual international schools, teachers come from a plethora of backgrounds and experiences. You absolutely cannot ensure that all educators have a consistent understanding of ELL teaching and learning.
Right. So as we move forward in this episode, we're not asking whether ELL support exists.
We're asking whether it functions, reduces the guesswork, and changes access.
And also whether it protects teachers from carrying language responsibility alone.
Now that we've named how the phase ELL support can mean different things to different people, it's helpful to pause to get really concrete.
Because across international schools, ELL support usually falls into a small number of recognizable models.
Many of these are grounded in research and best practices. The difference is how they are designed, how they're communicated, and how they're integrated into school daily life.
Where teachers sometimes struggle isn't with the existence of these models, it's with how they translate into day-to-day classroom decisions.
So let's walk through what these models often look like and where the friction can sometimes appear.
One of the most common models teachers encounter is the pull-out ELL support. This is where students leave the classroom for targeted English instruction with a specialist.
You'll often see this used for new arrivals or students at the earlier stages of English language development.
The focus might be on vocabulary, sentence structure, listening and speaking skills, or basic academic and sometimes conversational language.
In schools using this model, ELL support is clearly identifiable on a timetable. There's usually a dedicated ELL teacher or a team.
And students receive protected time to focus specifically on language development.
Where teachers say this model can feel hard to use isn't in that intention behind it. It's in the coordination of it.
Right.
Classroom teachers don't always know which language structures are being prioritized over there in the ELL wing.
Yeah, it can be very separate. The class teacher might not be informed on how pull-out learning connects to their current units, or maybe they don't at all connect to it. I worked for 3 years as a pull-out ELL teacher, and although I collaborated with my colleagues, I was never directed to align my units with what the students were learning in class.
Yeah, if you'd only known, you'd change that now probably, right?
Definitely.
So the homeroom or the English teacher may be making these moment-to-moment decisions about scaffolding, pacing, and assessment without full visibility.
Oof. Pull-out support can be incredibly effective. It just works best when communication between the specialists and the classroom teachers is built into the system.
Another model many schools use is push-in support. This is where an ELL specialist comes into the classroom during the lessons.
The idea here is that language support happens in context rather than isolation. Students remain part of the learning community while receiving scaffolding in real time.
In some schools, this may look like co-teaching. In others, it may look like targeted support for specific students during key parts of the lesson, where maybe another educator is sitting next to the student, quietly checking for understanding and working with additional ELL tools to support their success and participation in the lesson.
Push-in models often aim to build teacher capacity as well through modeling and shared practice. Class teachers also see what supports the ELL learner thrives from and can begin weaving those naturally into their own instruction.
Yeah. And a third common approach is a dedicated English or language support period in the timetable. These are additional lessons built into that timetable where they sit along the mainstream subjects or maybe even replace an elective.
And the focus here is often on building confidence, fluency, and familiarity with academic language.
In schools using this model, students may not be removed from the core lesson, but instead receive extra language learning exposure elsewhere in the week.
This approach is often chosen to balance language development with curriculum access. Some schools embed ELL support within broader learning support or inclusion frameworks too.
So rather than actually labeling a student explicitly as EAL or ELL, language support is integrated into differentiation practices. Teachers start to adapt their tasks, they provide scaffolds, and adjust expectations within the classroom.
Support may be provided by learning support teachers, classroom assistants, or maybe through flexible grouping. This model is often rooted in a desire to reduce stigma and promote equity.
Yeah, and then there's a reality many teachers recognize immediately, the informal or classroom-led model, where much of the language support happens through teacher judgment and experience.
Right. Teachers adjust instructions, they rephrase their questions, they'll model the language, and then they support students moment by moment. This model often exists alongside formal structures, filling those gaps where the systems don't reach.
What's important to name here is that most international schools don't rely on just one model. You'll often see a combination of these.
Definitely. Maybe you'll have pull out for new arrivals and then push in for certain year groups, extra English periods for some students, classroom-based support happening all over the place.
When schools talk about having this ELL support, they're usually referring to one or more or many of these approaches. And many schools invest significant time scaffolding, staffing, and giving these resources into making these models work.
Woohoo, which is great.
Fun time for the admin.
The question then isn't whether these models exist. Like we said, it's how clearly they are understood and how well they're coordinated.
Yeah. And then how consistently they translate into classroom decision-making.
Yeah, because this is where we start to see a difference between having a model
and having a model that actually reduces uncertainty for teachers and increases access for students.
Yes.
Up to now, we've talked about models that exist across international schools. But to really understand why those models often feel hard to use, we need to talk about where many of them come from.
Right. Most ELL and ESL models, or EAL models, whatever acronym you want to use, were designed inside national education systems, systems with a stable population, predictable funding, and clear accountability structures.
Yeah, let's start with the UK, because many international schools draw heavily from British frameworks. In the UK, ELL, or English Language Learning Provision, is tied to national funding structures. Schools receive additional funding based on student language needs.
And that funding comes with expectations around tracking, reporting, and accountability. There are nationally recognized ELL stages, clear benchmarks for language development, and established expectations for how long students typically receive the support. ELL teachers are often trained specifically within that system.
Now compare that to fee-paying international schools. Funding is not tied to language need. There is no external requirement to track ELL progress in any sort of standardized way. And accountability is often focused more on academic outcomes than language development.
Right. So while schools may adopt the UK style language, they don't have the same structures holding it in place. The model arrives, but the infrastructure doesn't.
A similar mismatch shows up when we look at the US ESL models, or English as a second language models.
Right. And many U.S. public schools, ESL support is built around pull-out instruction. Students receive targeted language instruction alongside a curriculum designed with that pacing in mind.
Yeah, ESL teachers are trained specifically for that role. And assessment systems allow for accommodation and modification to the curriculum within defined parameters.
But then when that model is placed inside the IB, British, or some blended international curricula, the tension appears.
Yeah, these curricula move quickly. Language heavy assessment is constant, and pacing is externally driven by exam boards or program requirements.
Right. And then the pull-out ESL support, it might still exist, but the curriculum doesn't slow down around it. So students are expected to keep up academically while still developing their foundational academic language. The model hasn't failed. It's just being placed inside a system that it wasn't designed for.
Yeah. Assessment structures are another major point of mismatch. National systems typically have defined accommodations for ELL learners, modified assessments, language allowances, and clear guidelines for grading language versus content.
In international schools, assessment frameworks vary widely. British schools may follow national curriculum expectations without national moderation.
IB schools assess against criteria that assume high language proficiency. I know that one very, very well.
American curriculum schools may blend standards without clear ELL assessment guidance.
This leaves teachers navigating in kind of a gray area. What's fair? What's rigorous? What's allowed?
I don't know. Without shared benchmarks, these decisions become subjective, and subjectivity increases teacher stress.
Add to that the fact that the classroom teacher themselves often come from a wide range of training backgrounds. Some have extensive experience with ELL pedagogy, but others are encountering multilingual classrooms for the first time.
Yeah, it's kind of the Wild West out here.
It's the Wild West. We say that a lot, don't we?
I love it. Both groups bring strengths, of course, but they don't always bring shared assumptions. And that diversity is one of the strengths of international education. International educators bring this beautiful blend of their expertise and their cultural pedagogical strengths. But it also means that schools can't assume a common starting point for language-aware practice.
Yeah. Like we said before, when systems rely heavily on individual expertise, inconsistency naturally follows. And all of this leads to a key structural mismatch we see repeatedly.
Many international schools lack the system-level components that make ELL models sustainable elsewhere.
Yeah, they often lack the clear language benchmarks. There may be no shared definition of what progress actually looks like or how long language development typically takes.
Progress tracking can also be inconsistent. Data may exist, but not in a way that's meaningfully informing classroom decisions.
Yeah. And it may not transfer clearly between year groups as well, or between teachers or between schools, and trained ELL specialists are not always available in sufficient numbers.
That is true. Some schools rely on generalist teachers. Others stretch small ELL teams across large populations. The expertise might exist, but it can be super thinly spread.
Yeah. Teachers can sometimes feel strained because systems designed for stability are being used in environments that are defined by mobility, diversity, and constant change.
That's a huge difference. And when those models feel hard to use, it can be because translation takes intentional design. Design that accounts for, as Trish said, the mobility, the diversity, the curriculum pressure, and the staffing realities.
Which brings us all to this important pivot point in this conversation. If we know all of these challenges exist, then the question has to change. It's no longer, why isn't this working?
No, it becomes what needs to be clarified, protected, or aligned for these models to work better.
And that's where our next conversation, or where our conversation moves next, I should say, from naming those system constraints to looking at how expectations outside the classroom shape what's actually possible.
Yes, especially when it comes to parents, language, and pressure.
The final piece we need to talk about in this episode is parent pressure.
Ooh, because even when schools want to build inclusive ELL systems, language beliefs held by families can quietly shape what's possible in practice.
Yeah, in many international school communities, English proficiency is so closely tied to perceptions of intelligence. You know, fluency is often interpreted as ability. Wrong. And limited English can be mistaken for limited understanding. Wrong.
Yeah. Parents worry that their child will fall behind.
Yeah.
We get it.
Yeah.
They worry that they're going to be compared unfairly to native English speakers.
Yeah.
We get it.
Yeah.
Or they are concerned that their child will struggle academically in future transitions.
So as a result, some parents push hard for rapid English acquisition. They want their child to catch up as quickly as possible.
Oh man, I've experienced this so many times in early years and the primary settings I've been in. Parents assume that, 1 year in an immersive English environment means that my child will be fluent. And then they can maybe transfer to another English setting, perhaps.
Yeah, and that urgency can really shape how ELL support is received in schools.
We've seen it go both ways. Teachers and schools can either encounter a demand that more accommodations be put in place to ensure their child's performance is assessed fairly.
And when parents assume their child is going to immediately absorb English, like I have with Czech.
Of course.
Sorry.
A moment of laughter.
So true. It's like
it is.
they see that their marks are slow, like have a slower progression than what they had imagined, and adaptation, scaffold, and differentiation is insisted upon by these parents.
That's right. And to ensure it's clear that their idea of language acquisition is happening, which it is. No matter what is showing on the progress report.
Yeah. And on that flip side, international schools also experience parents resistant to language accommodation.
Modified assessments can be misunderstood as lowered standards.
Yeah.
They're not. Well, maybe some of them could be, but most of them are not.
With the good teachers out there, no.
Exactly. Scaffolds may be seen as unfair advantages. They're not. And the use of a student's home language can be viewed as a barrier rather than a resource.
Yeah, this places schools in a really difficult position. They want to support language development appropriately, as they know to do.
Right.
And they want to maintain rigorous academic standards. And they want to reassure parents all at the same time.
That's a really hard position to be in.
Nice juggling balls in the air there.
Yeah. If systems are unclear, that tension gets passed down the line. Teachers may feel pressure to remove supports early or assess students as if the language isn't even a factor, or maybe they will try to justify decisions repeatedly without clear policy backing.
And this is where ELL support can quietly shift from inclusion to performance management. You know, the focus moves from access to optics, from language development to appearing on track.
And then without the strong systems, schools can end up negotiating language support on a case-by-case basis. Individual teachers manage conversations, specialists explain decisions repeatedly, and then the leaders are ending up mediating between pedagogy and expectation.
Yeah, and over time, this just becomes unsustainable. Not because schools don't want inclusive practices, but just because the inclusion requires protection at the system level.
When parents, teachers, and schools don't share this common understanding of language development, ELL support becomes fragile. It exists, but it's constantly under pressure.
And this brings us to the key takeaway of this episode. Many international schools genuinely want inclusive ELL practice. We know this. They want to satisfy parent need, and they want to support their ELL learners to the best of their ability.
We really believe that, but wanting the inclusion is not enough. Without clear models, aligned policies, shared benchmarks, and explicit communication with parents, ELL support struggles to function consistently.
Yeah, it becomes really dependent on the individual teachers that you have on staff, and on individual conversations and explanations, and individual resilience.
And that's why in so many international contexts, support exists, but only in the name.
So in our next episode, we're going to stay with this theme, but shift the perspective slightly. We're going to look at how language stress, identity, and behavior intersect in international classrooms, and why language-related challenges don't always show up academically first.
That's right. Because when we understand what's really happening beneath the surface, we can start building the systems that actually hold the complexity instead of placing it on individual teachers to carry alone.
Love that. So, as we wrap up this episode, we want to say a huge thank you for spending your time with us.
These are not simple conversations, and we know that. And if you're still listening along thinking, wait, that's how it is in my setting, then we are here with you.
Yep, we got you. We got you. And if you're also wondering, okay, but what do I do about this? That's exactly where our Teacher Toolbox episodes come in.
Those are my favorite. Yeah. To stick with us to gain concrete strategies, tools, and tips, and downloadable resources that may be the missing piece that you've been searching for after identifying a gap in whatever setting you're in.
International schools are navigating real complexity when it comes to ELL, and as we've explored today, many schools want inclusive, thoughtful language support, but need to ensure that the system is built to sustain it.
So let's name what we've covered today. We talked about how ELL support can exist in name, but also feel unclear in practice.
Yep. We unpacked the most common ELL models used in international schools and why each can create a little bit of friction if they're not well coordinated.
Then we looked at why home country models don't always translate into this international context, especially without shared benchmarks, tracking, and specialist capacity.
And we named how parent pressure and beliefs about language can really quietly shape what support looks like in our classrooms.
The takeaway here is that inclusive ELL practice needs systems that can actually hold the complexity.
And if this episode helped you to name something you've really been struggling with or feeling, or gave language to some of the challenges that you've struggled to explain yourself, then we want to say that clarity is often the first step towards change.
That's right. If you're looking for resources that dig deeper into your international teaching, the school systems you're in, or just life abroad, you can head over to our website at connectedglobal.org.
Yeah, there you're going to find guides, infographics, checklists, and lots of other goodies designed specifically for international educators and families.
You can also book a consultation with us over there if you want to talk through the ELL systems that you're looking at, school structures, or anything else that we've covered today, or any other questions that you're carrying.
Yeah, those conversations are always grounded in your context and your reality.
We'd also love for you to join our newsletter,
please,
where we share quarterly insights into international education, along with updates and new resources.
So if this episode sparked a question, a story, or a frustration you want us to explore, leave us a comment down below. Let us know. We read through every comment. Thank you for that. If you haven't already, please subscribe, share this episode with a colleague, and leave a review.
Please, please, please. It really does help our community grow.
So, until next time.
May your students be able to show what they understand.
Oh, your systems recognize it.
And your ELL support keep up and be international. We're going to do it that way, huh?
Okay, and we're going to keep our voice low, conversational. Here we go.
Is that your way of telling me I have a high little squeaky voice?
Why is it doing so much of the recalibration?
It goes, hello, I'm looking at the hand. And then
Because I feel like even sometimes when we just do a simple move, it does it.
I notice it too.
And it's hard for me because, I'm sorry,
we're movers.
An expressive person.
Are you ready?
Okay.